today I'd like to talk about the relationship of the one to the self. But we could also say the relationship of the one mind in terms of Tibetan Buddhism to the idea of self. I mean, when I was growing up, I was just aware of myself as a whole, so that in my family we all related to each other, and there was no sense of something other than just you yourself. You know, someone said your name and you were the brother or the son, and everybody was just themselves. And that was quite normal. That was, you might say, non-psychological. Nobody analysed it, nobody thought about it. So if you made decisions and you did things in your life, and you know, that was just yourself making decisions, that was yourself living your life. And that was just normal for me. And not being brought up religious, in my family and more or less the community I grew up in after the World War II, in the 40s and 50s, that there was no reference to religion of any kind. So ideas of something outside of the physical body, as it were, in terms of God or Christ or something like that, or even the soul as an interior place, as it were, none of that existed. So there was no reference other than yourself and your body, more or less. So you know, you did things in the world and you thought your thoughts, you had memories. And of course, at night you went into a dream, and it was all very basic. I mean, there was no philosophy, nothing intellectual, nothing psychological, nothing analytical, nothing like that. And I assume that my parents lived like that all their life. Now, it wasn't until I was 23 where something happened in my consciousness that altered the way I felt about myself, altered the way I experienced myself in my consciousness and in the world. So I call that a shift of consciousness. So there's some kind of change, some kind of transformation, and I had no idea what was taking place. It didn't mean anything to me, and I thought that it was a disturbance in my body, in my brain, as it were. And I remember when it first happened, I was in university. I went to the dean of the university to just talk over something I was experiencing. I forget the exact words, but it had to do with my thinking. I remember that I think I just became aware of my self-thinking, as it were, which I'd never done before, because everything was automatic. You know, you felt things, you thought things, but you didn't observe your thinking. You weren't like observing your thinking. But I think that was brought about partially by studying philosophy, where I did do a lot of thinking about the subject of philosophy, a lot of conversation with the professor. But I wouldn't say that I was aware of myself observing my thinking. It might have taken place, but I wasn't aware of that. So when I came out of the philosophy class, I don't think I thought much about philosophy. I don't think I carried it with me or was that particularly consumed by it or anything like that. It was simply a subject. In the same way with comparative religion, it was just a subject on the major religions, and it was just the structure and the dogma and the institution. So anyway, I went to the dean and I said something about my thinking, that I felt I remember the word I used, I felt that things were inconsistent. So when I went to him, I said, I'm aware of my thinking or my thought, and that there's a kind of inconsistency. So probably what was happening was that I was getting a bit confused about what to think about, whereas before I never had that problem. So I think that taking philosophy affected the way I was thinking about my life, or it maybe caused me to reflect on my life for the first time. So in observing my thinking, I must have felt confused, and I must have felt that my thinking was very unreliable, and maybe I became indecisive. And in fact, nothing really happened in that meeting, but I did actually leave university. So I think there was a sense of uncertainty about what I was doing in university, what my future would be, and I felt I no longer wanted to belong to the university or to have to think about my future. What am I going to specialise in when I graduate, that kind of thing. And it was probably about 3 months later when I left, that this shift of consciousness took place. And I did go to the doctor, like I went to the dean, I went to the doctor, because what was maybe a sense of uncertainty and confusion before in my thought became quite a deep level feeling and awareness, I suppose, of something troubling me, in my unconscious, as it were, in the background, maybe in what you might refer to as the soul, some kind of interior depth of feeling and awareness which I hadn't been aware of before. And nothing happened in the doctors, and I just lived with it. I just was on my own. I didn't have any particular friends at the time. And I think that sense of uncertainty turned into a sense of even going deeper than the psychological about thought and uncertainty, that kind of thing. I think it went even deeper than that, so that I couldn't think about it. It's more of a feeling, and then it turned into what I would call the numinous. Now, the numinous is a term that is applied to what is called the holy other. So it's like a sense of the spiritual, or the sense of God, or the spiritual dimension, or the spiritual activity. So it's a kind of emanation, it's a presence or emanation that you can feel within yourself and in the world around you. So nature and the world around you can feel very numinous, feel very like an otherness, something quite strange and different, as if it's coming from somewhere else, i.e. from some spiritual dimension or God or something like that. But I didn't have any of those terminology. None of this terminology or language was available to me at the time. I didn't know about it. So it was just an organic thing going on inside me and affected the world around me. So when you're experiencing the numinous and the divine presence, as it were, what's really happening is that numinosity carries with it certain deep quality feelings and even perceptions. So we're dealing with maybe spiritual perceptions and deep level perceptions, and you may not even call it feeling. You know, in the level of numinosity, it goes beyond the feeling. So what they say is that the numinous presence of the Holy Other fills you with fascination. So it's like watching a film or something like that. You know, you're fascinated by watching a film, and it fills you with awe because you feel like it's something quite powerful and something more powerful than you. It's like something coming into your life, and that presence is quite overwhelming, quite powerful within yourself and the world around you. So the whole world around you and inside you is in this kind of presence, and it's a kind of sense of unitative perception. You have a sense of union with the world. And the other aspect of it is that it's terrible. So it fills you with a sense of dread or terror. And that's exactly what I felt. I felt definitely that at the deepest level, it was a feeling of terror. So when you're experiencing terror, I wouldn't call it a feeling. I wouldn't call it a normal feeling, a normal emotion. I think it's actually deeper than that. So it's like when you experience very deep level moods, like depression or something, very deep level moods, it's like consciously you're out of your depth. It's so deep, you feel you're being overwhelmed. And that's why it's related to an illness, because with the term illness, you lose control, you're out of control, and you can't escape it, you can't get out of it. You've got to go with it. You either go with it or you medicalize it, you medicate yourself, go to the doctor, etc. But as I say, I went to the doctor and I didn't get any results there. But anyway, so I was living with this sense of terror, this sense of fascination, this sense of awe, and I didn't have any terminology. I felt all right in the sense that I could cope with it, and it was like, you know, if you think in your imagination, if you think of you walk into a wood in the middle of the night, and the moon's out and the light's shining, and you're going into the wood, and there's all kinds of creatures, animals in the wood, etc. And it was more like that kind of feeling. It was like that the sense of the other, the otherness, the divine presence, the numinous, was like the world itself, consciousness of the world, or consciousness and the world, entered a different dimension, and that would relate to the psyche in terms of, say, dreams, imagination, that kind of thing. And but the overall sense was very spiritual, very numinous, about the other, a sense of the divine presence or God. And then when that was going on for a few weeks, I came out of that kind of more shadowy world, you might say, in terms of the moon, as it were, and then came into the daylight, into the sun, and I felt very liberated, I felt very free, and within a short period of time I actually started reading spiritual books, and I identified my condition as a form of the dark night of the soul, and then that moves into a state of enlightenment. So I did feel enlightened, and in the Tibetan Buddhist it says when you're in nirvana, the emptiness and the one mind, which is synonymous with God, then you are illuminated and you are free, you feel liberated. And that's exactly what I felt. So I think the whole thing is authentic because I didn't know anything about it. I had no idea that it was happening to me, and the whole process had been recorded in the sacred text. So I thought it must be real because it fit the description perfectly. So I had no doubt in my mind that I was a spiritual person and that I was living a spiritual life. Now, if I look at what is the relationship of the illumination of the one mind, you might say, to self, I think the first thing I realized was that in the very first spiritual book I read, In Search of the Miraculous, about the meeting of Uspensky with Gurdjieff, one of the main aspects of self-knowledge or self-realization was self-observation. So that means that your sense of self is observing consciousness, is observing thought, consciousness, and the whole process of your life. That means what you've experienced, what's in your memory. So in a sense, what connection I made was when I was in university and I went to the dean and I was talking about observing my thought. That was self-observation, so I didn't know that had taken place. So that's another, you might say, validation of an authentic process, because I knew nothing about self-observation, and then I discovered that that's one of the most important things in the process of self-realization. In other words, self-observation leads to self-realization, and that's the same as self-knowledge leads to self-realization or liberation, and that's precisely the procedure of beginning with self-observation, doing that for quite a long period, and then deepening into, you might say, the psyche, deepening into the psyche, you might say, beyond the conscious mind where thinking is, and then being liberated, coming out of the psyche into the spiritual, and then being liberated, and it's referred to as the clear light of the one mind. You're in your diamond body, it's the clear light of the one mind. So that would say that in nirvana, in the one mind, you realize your true self. And that means that the sense of self that's illuminated and feels liberated in the spiritual dimension can then be distinguished from the ego identity of your personality in your consciousness and psyche. So as a student, I have an identity, an ego, and I'm in the world and I'm behaving as a student. That was my normal identity at that time. So throughout my childhood, you have an identity as a son, as a brother, as a student, and then in the university you're a student, and you have that identity. So when I gave up having that identity, as it were, and I was self-observing, and then moving away from the conscious mind and the kind of, you might say, influence of the ego, because the ego is the center of the conscious mind, and you move deeper into the psyche, into the unconscious, then in Jungian psychology you're moving towards yourself. And when you are liberated from your psyche, then you, in a sense, yourself has been illuminated, and then you realize you're in the spiritual dimension. So without knowing any of this process, without knowing anything about this, all those processes took place within me over maybe a year period. So within a year or so period, I'd gone through the whole process. So I was feeling extremely free and liberated, and that wasn't just in my mind. I mean, that was like in the world as well. I mean, I literally felt free as a whole. I felt free emotionally, free psychologically, free in my consciousness, free in my body, free in the world around me with people. And you know, it was more than being happy. It wasn't just being happy. It's probably what they say when you're in nirvana, you can experience bliss, a sense of bliss. Or you could say ecstasy. So it's a kind of ecstatic energy. And that sense of self spiritually in the one mind has been with me for 50 years. So that means that part of the human being, as it were, or the part of myself as a whole, being spiritually aware of myself in the one and feeling the oneness with the world, that's just a fact. That's just a fact that is as real as your body. So your body is a fact. You have your body all your life, but you may not have self-awareness all your life. But that self-awareness happened to me. I didn't do anything. Happened to me as a process, and that has been a fact. Just like you have a memory and you have an identity, etc. That's a fact. So all I'm saying now in this talk is that I'm not concerned about spiritual systems. I'm not concerned about religious systems, meditational systems, or what anyone else says, any other teacher like Jung or Gurdjieff or Krishnamurti. I'm not concerned with their opinion or their conclusions or their teachings, because I have independence and integrity and empowerment in myself to know that what I've experienced or what I've gone through is absolutely real and is a fact. So I don't have to justify that. I don't have to explain anything other than what I'm saying now, that that was the procedure, that was authentic, it was validated in the sacred texts, and other people in the past have gone through that process in various ways, and that's all I can say about being a spiritual person, living a spiritual life. Now, when I started mixing with people that were very interested in Gurdjieff and Jung and spirituality and Krishnamurti, meditation, the I Ching, the Tao, all the systems, all the kind of psycho-spiritual systems, to those people I never shared what I knew about myself. I never shared that. I never told anybody. I never revealed it to anybody. So in effect, I was learning in my consciousness, in my memory, in terms of knowledge and experience, I was learning about the subject. So I didn't need to know about the spiritual as a fact, but in my consciousness, I seem to have needed to know about the subject, to know about that field of knowledge. So that's what I've done for 50 years, more or less for 50 years. I've been investigating and opening myself up to the whole field of knowledge. So I've been interested in psychical research, in magic, in occultism, in mythology, the whole spectrum of what's called the New Age thinking. And I didn't really have any control about that. It's like, I remember when I was 21, I was 19, and I started writing poetry. I hadn't been interested in poetry, I hadn't really read any poetry books or anything, but I just started to think in terms of poetry. A poem came into my mind, I started writing poetry, and then I started doing art, and I became very inspired and very creative. And so, like spirituality, those things happened to me. I didn't go looking for them, I didn't practice anything, I wasn't trained, but I think I inherited that from my family. I think that was a psychic inheritance. And so anyway, when you're feeling inspired and feeling creative, something happens inside you. You're moved, you're driven to do that. Like you really want to do it, and it takes you over, just like spirituality took me over. That creativity took me over, as it were. But unlike spirituality, it wasn't permanent. So I could write poetry and then stop writing poetry, do art and stop doing art. But once I was awakened and illuminated in my in terms of the spiritual awareness of myself, the light went on, and you don't switch it off. It becomes a permanent fact of your nature. Whereas in your consciousness and your thought and your memory, it's very fragmented, it's very changeable. So you never do something all of the time, you're always changing. It may be that you do poetry fairly regularly, but what I mean is it's not an absolutely permanent thing, because in a sense you can't sit down and write poetry 24 hours a day, but in spiritual awareness it's there permanently. So I'm aware of myself when I get up in the morning, I'm aware of myself throughout the day, I'm aware of myself when I go to bed. And I'm also aware of my identity, of my ego, of my consciousness, what I'm thinking, what I'm doing, the decisions I make in the world, in society. So when I started mixing with people that were very into spirituality, then to them I took on the identity of a spiritual person. But I didn't have that identity myself, because I never shared what I knew about spirituality. I didn't share that with anybody. So I felt that the people I met were searching for the meaning of what they were reading, searching for the meaning of spirituality. But I felt I already knew that. I already knew what the meaning of spirituality is, which is to become self-aware. And yet I was very interested in the process, in the systems of knowledge, I suppose what the relationship is of oneself to the world of spirituality. What was my place in it? What was I going to do with this awareness? But I never singled myself out. I never told anybody. I didn't emphasize anything. And even to myself, I didn't go around thinking I'm illuminated or I'm self-aware. It was just a natural part of myself. So it wasn't like a problem, or I felt different from other people, that I felt even different within myself. It felt perfectly natural. But maybe one of the things I might have been interested in was, why did it happen? You know, how did it happen? Why did it happen? And what does that mean for me in the world? What part do I play? And I suppose that was kind of one of the reasons, although I wasn't conscious of it, but probably I was wondering what I should do about it, or where it fit in, and so forth. And as I say, I got very involved with Krishnamurti over a long period of time. So he was my kind of reference point, because he was very individual. He talked about working it out for yourself, etc. But I remember the very first talk I went to at Brockwood Park in 1971, the second year the school was open there. And I remember that nothing he said meant anything to me. As a process of analysis, it didn't mean anything to me at all. And I knew that I was already aware. I didn't need to know what he was saying, because I was already self-aware. But I enjoyed going there, meeting the people, and as I said, I was very interested in the process. I was very interested in what he was saying in terms of the process, because he went through a process. But in the end, in terms of today, I would say that what Krishnamurti considers an objective spiritual process that happened to him, I would question that and critique him, and I think that he didn't move into the spiritual dimension and become aware of the self in the sense of Tibetan Buddhism, but was in a kind of altered state and had the attitude that you should, in a sense, negate yourself. That when you move into the spiritual dimension, as it were, what he called the universal mind, you should eliminate the self, you should negate it, and in that universal mind there is no self. And that actually does contradict certainly Tibetan Buddhism, but it doesn't contradict a lot of the schools of Buddhism, and also I think Zen Buddhism as well. I'm not sure. I think Zen Buddhism may be split over that, but I know in Zen Buddhism when you become enlightened, then they say that's discovering your self-nature. That's exactly what happened to me, exactly that. When I was enlightened, I felt I did discover my self-nature. And once you do, then it's a fact. But anyway, I kept on going to the talks of Krishnamurti every year. But as I say, all of the knowledge and his system of analysis in terms of self-observation, I didn't think it rang true. I didn't think that when I self-observe, that's not what I'm observing. So I fundamentally disagree with his idea of self-observation and the way he focuses on thought. He sees thought as the most destructive element in consciousness. And I don't find a problem with thought. So there's a fundamental difference. In fact, in self-observation, you might say, which is going on within consciousness, it's not in the spiritual dimension, it's in the psyche consciousness. When you're self-observing, then that simply means that you're consciously present in terms of observing your consciousness as you live. So as you live, if you get up in the morning and you go in the kitchen and then you have a cup of tea in the sitting room, etc., and you go out and you go through the day, self-observation is to me a naturally occurring thing. So that naturally occurred to me. I didn't make it happen by reading books. That actually happened to me. And again, like self-awareness, self-observation is an organic, natural part of daily life. If it's not active in you, then you don't know what it is. You can't read a book and practice it. It's either happening or it's not. So in terms of self-observation, leading to self-realization, leading to self-awareness, they're all natural parts of your nature, your organism. So that means that you can't practice that in your psyche by altered states, by meditation, by analysis, analysing yourself, therapeutically, like in Jungian psychology. And yet people read books and they want to know how to do it. So in Search of the Miraculous by Uspensky, where I discovered the process of self-observation, he finds it very difficult to understand it himself and to communicate it. It's very difficult. But the reason why it's difficult to communicate because it's an organic process, it's a natural process. So if you take an artist who's a really good artist, say a genius like Picasso, when he grew up as a child, that genius, that inspiration, that process of being an artist, it was organic inside him. It wasn't because his father was teaching him to do art and he was very good at it. It's much more than that. It's inbuilt into your organism. It's inbuilt into your psyche. You inherit that from your past, I believe. And so, in a sense, the conscious mind doesn't decide to become an artist. I mean, people go to art school, people go to church, people read spiritual books, and they want to be a spiritual person, they want to be an artist. But you can't be an artist in the true sense of the word. You either are or you're not. It's either integral to your organism, it's natural or it's not natural. That's why you can't teach it. So all the analysis of Krishnamurti saying to people about awareness and taking them through a procedure of observing different aspects of their psyche, different aspects of their memory, and going into the nature of suffering and sorrow, all those layers, all that talk he did for 30 years, in one sense it's a total waste of time, because you cannot teach, communicate an organic process that's alive in you. You can't do that. So I would say, on that level, if you're not an artist, then you're not an artist. And if you're not a spiritual person, you're not a spiritual person. And if this doesn't suit you, it doesn't suit you. So I would say that before the age of 23, when I was just an ordinary person, I can imagine myself just carrying on, not going through the spiritual process, just living my life, and that's fine. And plenty of people, I mean, very, very bright people who are artists, poets, they're not interested in spirituality. And yet people in the new age that want to be spiritual, and they're trying to be spiritual and trying to find a process that works for them. I mean, the fact is, it isn't like that. If you're not spiritual, you're not spiritual. And if you're involved with psychic altered states of meditation, then that's not spiritual. That's something completely different. And if you're not self-observing, then I would say you're analysing. If you're not really self-observing, which means you're self-aware of observation, of consciousness as a natural thing in your daily life, then you can't force yourself to do that. You can't make it happen. And those people that are self-observing, those people that are self-aware, know the fact of it, and they can do it themselves. And those people that don't know the fact of it have to depend on a system, depend on the religion, depend on people like Krishnamurti and Gurdjieff and Steiner and Jung. They have to depend. And therefore they'll never find it, because you can't find it. I mean, it's, again, it's so organic, it's like I mean, certain people at a very young age can sing. And so as a child, out of, you know, a group of people, a group of children, somebody will be able to sing really well. And that probably is inherited. Now you can be envious of that person, you can be jealous of that person, you can be jealous of of people that are successful in life. You can be jealous of spiritual people, you can be jealous of any kind of person. But when you're comparing your ego or your identity with that person who's singing wouldn't understand the psychology of envy, the psychology of jealousy over that, because it's natural for them, it's organic, it's natural. So they're not being psychological about it. They don't have an image of themselves and saying, wow, look, I'm a singer, you know, and how different I am from everybody else, and, you know, how superior. But they're not. When something's natural in a child and they grow up, that they're just being themselves. They're not being egotistic. In the same way, those people that are spiritual are spiritual. You know, I mean, it's just a natural thing that happened. I didn't ask for it. I didn't want it or ask for it or anything. And even though I say that at the beginning there was this sense of bliss, and that you might say, in a certain sense, is always there in a certain way, but I wouldn't say it's exactly the same as being happy or sad. When you're sad and you want to be happy, so it's not like bliss is that important. It's not, you're not blissed out as if you're in ecstasy all the time. No, it's much more subtle. It's just that in self-awareness, when I'm just walking by the river or I'm just sitting quiet in the room, then it's a certain lightness. It's a lightness of being, your light. Over the years, in my consciousness, like the dark night of the soul, it can often be insufferable, it can often be incredibly difficult, incredibly overpowering in my consciousness, in my emotions and psychology. I mean, I think that I go through exactly what other people go through, the whole spectrum, and I can go at the very deep end of senses of feeling dread or feeling. I mean, I don't label things in the sense of, you know, depression. I don't label things, but I know that I'm in that deep level. I don't call it psychosis or schizophrenia. I mean, they're all terms for those deep level psychic moods and states that you can't analyse. You can't, I mean, no psychologist or therapist can actually analyse a schizophrenic, analyse a psychotic, analyse a person in depression. They're beyond the conscious analytical mind. So the person undergoing that is very alone. You know, no one can share that with you. You've got to like deal with it yourself. So in our society, most people will get medical help. But because I dealt with it myself at the beginning, I always deal with it myself when it comes up in my life. And it can be triggered by relationship. I could be in a deep relationship with somebody, and that gets triggered, or I go to the deep end of the feeling level and psychic level of relationship. So what I'm saying, although in my spiritual awareness in myself, that you might say is something in itself, that's just there, but in my consciousness, in my identity with other people, in what you call the ego consciousness, it can be just as troubling as anybody else. So I never mix up spirituality with behavior. So I don't feel it's my duty to behave in a certain way because I'm a spiritual person. So I never mix up psychology and behavior and consciousness and ego and identity with being a spiritual person. There's no contradiction, there's no hypocrisy, because there's no psychology in spiritual. There's no image, there's no identity, there's nothing to live up to. It's just a permanent fact of freedom, it's just a permanent fact of being illuminated, that's all. I mean, if you were to ask me what's the difference between self and ego or identity in your consciousness as a person, as an artist, as a poet, as I am, then I would say, of course, in the ordinary world, to other people you're a poet and you're an artist, have an identity, an ego in your consciousness, and that's fine, and you just interact with people, that's fine. In yourself, you're very alone. And because there's no content, there's no structure, there's no psychology, there's no consciousness, there's no relationship, you're simply alone. So when I'm walking along the river, I'm alone. When I'm sitting quiet, I'm alone. And that aloneness is just a fact. And I do think, through my childhood, I do think that I was pretty much more in myself than my ego identity. But of course I didn't make that distinction when I was a child. But at the age of 23, I think it was easy for me to move into that sense of self and being alone, because I always had felt alone as a child like that. And when I was growing up, I didn't belong to anything, I didn't join anything. So in effect, to my family and my friends, I didn't have any specific identity other than my name and my family, because I didn't belong to anything, I didn't have any special talent or ability, I didn't do anything special, whereas some of my friends, they were into music and into different things, and they had that kind of identity. So if I think of why that thing happened to me, if I think, why did I become self-aware? Basically, I have no idea. But I think whatever that process was and is now, I mean, it might be that it happens naturally, and yes, there will be a shift of consciousness where the normal sense of your identity, your normal conditioning in the world, in society, as a student, as part of a family, etc. Yes, I mean, you might feel troubled because of that shift of consciousness, as I did. I went to the doctor. So, yes, there was like a shift. And then once that had happened, I was perfectly all right. And that aloneness with myself and not sharing it with anybody, not feeling the need to communicate, then probably that was helped by as a child being very alone. And when I say being alone, I don't mean that I didn't have friends and the family were very much part of my life. I wasn't isolated. I didn't live in fantasy. I never read books, and I wasn't that. It wasn't peculiar or different. No, it's just that I like to be alone. I took walks alone. I go down into Oxford, go to the museums, and I enjoyed my own space. I enjoyed my own sense of self and discovery and that kind of thing. So now if we look at the idea of the spiritual dimension and the idea of the one mind. So if I were to ask myself, what is this one mind? What is this one mind? What is this mind where myself is, as it were? Not my identity, not my thoughts and memories in my consciousness, but right now, what is this mind that came into my life? Or this door, as they say, a door of perception. What is this spiritual perception? What is this mind? And again, I refer to the text when they say that the mind is one. So the one mind means that self is one, the mind is one, and it's empty, it's nothing, it's empty. So I remember sitting in the 1970s in Oxford. I remember I used to walk around the Thames River and the Cherwell River and through the parks and the colleges, and I used to walk around the city and through the city, that kind of thing, for many hours. And I remember sitting in the park, University Park, and it's a very big open space, a really big open space. I remember just sitting there, and my hearing and my sight seemed to have no limit. So if I was hearing sounds, I was very, very sensitive, and I could hear sounds so that I could follow the sound. I could tune into the sound of birds and other things at a very, very vast distance away. And my sight seemed to have no limit. Although I was looking at the sky and I was hearing certain sounds, my hearing and my sight had no limit. And that would be the one, because the one is emptiness, and that emptiness goes beyond all form, goes beyond time and space. So in a sense, the emptiness of the one, being spiritual dimension, is beyond the psyche and beyond the body. It's beyond the physical dimension and beyond the psychic dimension. So that means when I was sitting in the park and I had no limit to my sight and my hearing, and being in the one, then you might say there was no limit to the hearing, no limit to the sight. And in that sense, hypothetically, you might say spiritual awareness is not limited by the physical boundaries of time and space, in sense of the universe, as it were, and by the psychic dimensions and space, of the imagination, of dreams, of all of that. And as I say, I never told anybody. I mean, in fact, I'm just beginning to share something with my friend, and I've known him for 30 years. So even with my friend over 30 years, who's deeply into Jungian psychology, he's a professor, and all of that, he knows all about spirituality. I've never shared it with him, I've never shared it with anybody. And as a child, my aloneness, I didn't know how alone I was, but I probably was quite alone. And it was very natural for me to be alone in myself. And I think that right now I seem to be wanting to open this whole thing up for myself, because I've never done it before. I've never really talked about or even thought about the implications of being self-aware. That's 50 years, because I've been involved with studying all different systems of knowledge and different religions and different aspects of the psyche. That's what I've been involved in. Research into mythology and synchronicity and all of that. Now, I don't know why I did all of that. I don't know why I was 50 years investigating, you might say, self-knowledge, when I was already aware. I was already spiritually aware. And yet people say that's the goal, that's the goal to reach. And if I was in that, if I'm in that state, then why did I spend 50 years thinking about a subject, writing a lot of books and mixing with people in all levels of the New Age spirituality, all of that? I don't know why. I don't really know why. But it doesn't really matter to me whether I wrote any books or not, whether I recorded any experiences of synchronicity. None of that content of consciousness actually matters to me, just like what's Krishnamurti never mattered to me. But while I was involved in reading the books and studying and writing and going very deep into things and having very profound psychic experiences, synchronicities, visions, apparitions, all of that, I was very engrossed in it. I was very dedicated to doing it. I gave myself to it, as you would as an artist or a politician. I was really dedicated to it. But now that it's over, now it doesn't mean anything to me. So to myself, it didn't really matter whether I went through that process or not. But I did feel I was driven to do it. I do feel that that was really an integral part of my life, and I needed to do that. I needed to, what I would call, I needed to do something cultural and, you might say, leave a record of my researches, if you like. But to myself now, that 50 years is like a blank. I can forget it. It has no influence on me. And Jung and Krishnamurti, none of that has any influence on me. And I'm just as free as I've always been free. But if you see a child running around, and you've got nostalgia for children type of thing, your childhood, oh, I wish I could be free like the child running around in a kind of paradise, etc., etc. But you see, to the child, there's no image, they're just a child running around free. And that's how I feel when I'm sitting quiet, I walk down the river. I mean, it has nothing to do with anybody else, it has nothing to do with anything. I mean, it's just my natural self. So, if I see people very successful in the world, they're writers, they're celebrated writers, they're living a very good life, they're having a very full life, good luck to them. That's their natural self. If they're a real writer, that's their natural self. And people can envy them, feel jealous, and compare themselves to them, all of that stuff like that. But to those people who are authentic, who are absolutely culturally authentic artists, even politicians and other people, that's very natural to them. They're not performing on the stage, they're not wearing a mask in the sense that their identity, their ego doing that is very, very organic, it's very natural. They're driven by passion, they're driven by inspiration, they're driven by their ancestral legacy, they're driven by what they've inherited, their abilities, their characteristics, their psychic talent. And people are very envious of celebrity and think celebrity are all phony. But some of those people that are actors, some of those people that are celebrities, are very authentic. But when we read the media and all of that stuff, and there's all this kind of, accusation and trying to destroy someone's character and image and everything like that, very soul destroying, literally soul destroying, character assassination. Those people that do that psychological damage are totally ignorant of the fact that when something's deeply authentic, organic, and is real to you, and you have to do it, then it's the most natural thing in the world. You think, well, why do people climb Mount Everest? Why do people go to the Antarctic? Which is incredible, but for some people that's very natural. For them, it may not be a display of courage. For them, it may not be psychological. They're overcoming their fear. Or, wouldn't it be nice to be a celebrity? Wouldn't it be nice to be the king and queen or something like that? But for the people doing it, it's very natural. If that's their real life, and that's organic, and they've inherited it, and they're living a real tradition, then it's very natural. If you want to go into the church, or you went into a monastery, or you want to be a priest, or you want to do anything in society, those people working in institutions as teachers, in all aspects of society, all aspects of institutions, there's a lot of people in the hierarchy. To them it's very, very natural, very organic. They're serving a very deep level purpose on this planet to do with tradition, right from the Aboriginal times and ancestral times. They're living out a drama that we call culture and society and history that's very real for them. They're living it. They are that. In their identity, in their personality, they are that. They're not showing off. They're not performing. They're not playing a game. They're the ones that really are dedicated to humanity. I mean, to people that are dedicated to humanity in an organic, natural way, and no different than the animals, they're living their natural life. They're driven by their instincts, and we're driven by our consciousness, by our personality, by our inherited characteristics, our psychic abilities. We're driven by that. We want to realise our full potential, and we want to realise that for everybody, in education, in politics, in society, globalisation, the internet. These are 100% dedicated people who want the best for the world, and they're on humanity's side. And yet they're envied, they're accused of this and that, hypocrisy, and so forth and so on. But the point is, you're not perfect, even spiritually. you're not perfect because you don't have an image. You're not living up to anything because you don't have an image. It's only other people that have an image of you. You don't have an image if it's natural. That's your natural self, just like a child. It's just natural. An animal, it's natural. It's only people that are ignorant of the fact that when you're living something organic and natural, you don't have an image. You're not living up to anything. So you can't be hypocritical because you're not living up to anything. You're just doing your work. You're working. So I'd say to people to learn to respect other people, not to be so cynical. And realise that at the deepest level, there are people that really do care about this world. And from a spiritual point of view, using spiritual perceptions of love and compassion, understanding and insight and intelligence and justice and ethics, all of that, that there are people imbued with those qualities and ought to be supported. When you do something on a very deep level, you do access compassion, for example, because you're dedicated to humanity and you're aware of humanity. You're aware of what humanity is going through, both emotionally, psychologically, socially, historically. You have a very deep awareness. I mean, most people in that category are very aware of history, have a very deep sense of history. Especially in England, we have a very deep sense of history. Whether you're a writer, a musician, a politician, you have a very deep sense of tradition and history. You're part of a great movement of people who are trying to solve the problems on every level, trying to gain insight, understanding. And if that's not the way you are, then you're not that way, and get on with your life and do what you do.